Paul McCartney was part of the band that changed the world. By the time the Beatles arrived in the United States in 1964, the four musicians from Liverpool were already world-famous symbols of a cultural revolution. In the 30 years since the Beatles, Paul McCartney has continued to create. First with his band Wings in the 1970s, and then with numerous solo albums, he broke sales records and he went on world tours. He's also been pursuing other passions. In 1991, he composed his first classical symphony, the Liverpool Oratorio. In 1999, he had his first gallery showing of the paintings he had been quietly doing for 20 years. Recently, he published his first book, Blackbird Singing, an anthology of poems and lyrics from 1965 to 1999. Tonight, a conversation with the poet, painter, musician, Paul McCartney, a legend.
I am pleased to have with us Paul McCartney for this conversation. Why the title Blackbird Singing?
It was actually suggested by my editor. I had no idea how to put a poetry book together. He's a poet, he's done millions of them. So I let him lead me with a lot of the stuff. And he said, I thought of a title, how about Blackbird Singing? I said, you got it?
Yeah, but just that. Yeah. You didn't say why, you just said...
No, it sounded like a good title to me. It's, you know, people know my song Blackbird, and it opens with Blackbird singing in the dead of night.
And the choice between lyrics and poems,
yeah.
The balance, the sense of what to include and what not to include.
Yeah. Well, in truth, at the beginning, I really didn't want to put any lyrics in because I thought it's a poetry book. And if I start putting lyrics in, I thought it's going to be like sheet music. It becomes a songbook, and a lot of people have got those lyrics anyway. But he persuaded me. He said, no, he said, these lyrics, they're poems. They're not just songs. They work on the page. And he reminded me that a good friend of mine, Allen Ginsberg, had said to me, Paul, he said, that Eleanor Rigby's a hell of a poem. And obviously I was very pleased to hear that coming from someone like Allen. And so putting those facts together, I said to Adrian, well, let's think about it. And by the end of the book, I agreed with him. I think it was a good idea to put them in there.
What's the difference in writing a poem and writing lyrics to a song?
It's a strange thing for me. I think really the answer is I don't think there is any difference. But for me, I started off thinking that you can get deeper with a poem. I say, having put the book together, I don't necessarily think that's true now. But when my friend Ivan died, who I spoke about, it didn't seem appropriate to do a song about him. It seemed more personal, like I was writing a letter to him to do a poem. And he himself was a classic scholar, studied Latin and Greek at Cambridge. So I just had the feeling that he might like that better. I had a very good friend of mine called Ivan Vaughan, and he actually got Parkinson's disease in his early 30s, and he was our friendship started when at school I heard that he was born on exactly the same day as I was in Liverpool. So obviously our friendship started, we had plenty to talk about. And later on, he took me to a village fete in Woolton and introduced me to his friend, John Lennon. So obviously Ive was a very pivotal person in my life, and I loved him dearly. He used to play in our skiffle group that we had. And I used to play a thing called a tea-chest bass. For any of you who don't know what that is, it's these things that the tea used to arrive in England from India and places like that. And once you'd finished the tea, you got this empty case, and people will attach a broom handle on the top of it and a piece of string, and they're used as an instrument. So Ive was the bass player in the skiffle group. You didn't need to be too musical, but you just had to have a lot of passion, and Ive had that. He went on to be a classic scholar at Cambridge, and as I say, he got Parkinson's, died very young. And the tragedy was he knew exactly what was going on. He was very well read, so he could understand exactly what was going on with him. But he was mad to the end. He had a little rhyme. We used to say, Cranlock navel, Cranlock pie. This kind of thing he'd just come out with, you see. This is why I love the boy. So that's a brief explanation to the poem. It's called Ivan. Two doors open on the 18th of June. Two babies born on the same day in Liverpool. One was Ivan, the other me. We met in adolescence and did the deeds they dared us do. Jive with Ive, the ace on the bass. He introduced to me at Woolton Fete a pal or two. And so we did. A classic scholar he, a rocking roller me. As firm as friends could be. Cranlock navel, Cranlock pie. A tear is rolling down my eye. On the 16th of August, 1993, one door closed. Bye-bye, Ivy. All right, that's Ivy.
Some have said that the difference is that poems can be more free, whereas music has certain kinds of demands that poem doesn't have.
I think that's true. It depends what kind of music, you know. Yeah. Popular music tends to be rhymes at the end of each line, but not all music does that. You can, you know, it depends. Like I say, if you're looking at some contemporary forms of music, poems work very well. You can be as free. But in my kind of music, I tend to think of songs as verses, middles, rhymes at the end of lines. So it's true that way.
Do you think of yourself first and foremost when you look at this life that you've had as a songwriter?
I'm having. Charles.
And having, exactly. See, he said. And there's a philosophy behind that. I know. There's a philosophy behind that. Do you think this life that you are having
and have had.
And will have.
Will continue.
And will have. Will continue to have.
Hopefully.
For many, many years. Yeah. That this is a life that you are, most of all, at the core, a songwriter.
Yeah, I think that is true. It's my first love. It's something that I started doing when I was 14 and have loved doing. It comes quite easy to me. I'm very lucky in that respect. And the great thing about it is it has often quite a big effect on people. People will come up to me in the street and just stop me and say, thanks for the music. And they'll tell me stories, and all age groups too. Will say, you know, I was in college and I was having the hardest time, but your music got me through it. One of the greatest things was I was at a dinner party with my brother and sister-in-law, John and Jody, and there was a lady there whose son had contracted cancer, and she said, he's a really big fan of yours. Would you sign a record for him? And I said, oh, sure, of course. You know, I said, I'll send him round the whole repertoire, and because he was ill in bed. So I did that, and it was fabulous. The next year, I met his mum again, and she said, thanks for doing that. That was really great. She said, you know, he's better now. You can't get better than that.
I mean, laughter and love and music, you know, can make a difference. Why haven't you done this before? Put these
no one asked
poems. No editor came to you and said, hey, Paul, do you have any poems in you?
Yeah. No, it's half of it's that. But probably more importantly, I hadn't really written any, first of all, and then I hadn't written many. And you reach a point when you've got a few, and they're lying around the house. And it was Linda actually talked to Adrian Mitchell, my English editor, and she said, what do you think about Paul doing a poetry book? And he thought it was a great idea. So the two of them were hatching the plot to put the idea to me, because I found out about it and thought it was very nice of them to do that.
Yeah, he says, this book was Linda's idea and she is our inspiration for this. Did you have trepidation about putting this between covers and say, here is the way I write poems? And
a little, because I think there is a danger that poetry can seem a bit pretentious. When I was in school, the idea of sort of standing up and reading a poem was a little difficult, because you move out of your natural persona and you sort of go to another place. You know. But I do like it, and I like listening to poetry, and I like reading poetry. So I got over that reservation and thought, this is something I could do. And I'm forever jumping into these things. You know, someone says, you know, would you like to do this? Would you like to work on this? And I bite these things off and just think, I've got a lot of passion. So I think, I'd love to do this. I'd love to do it.
It was true about painting. It was true about sailing. It was true about writing. It was true about composing symphonies.
Yeah, well, working with a symphony orchestra, to me, people offer them to me. And I'm so enthusiastic. I think, wow, that'd be great to do. So I've accepted before I've even really thought about it.
The family is very, very important to you. It has always been.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I mean, Linda played in the group simply because she was traveling and it made her part of everything. Where does that come from?
It comes from just loving your family, basically. I don't find that difficult at all. But I've got, personally myself, I've got a very strong Liverpool family. Yeah. So, and there's millions of them. So in fact, they're breeding as we speak.
Yes, I was going to say. More and more people. Hey, mate, I'm your cousin.
Really?
Your cousin.
Oh, who are you? No, it's a large family, and they're great, and I'm just our Paul. Yeah. Never mind, you wouldn't ever catch any of them calling me Sir Paul. You know, it's just out of the question, which I'm glad of. Sticking with the Liverpool theme, in my early days, you'd see all sorts of sights, probably like New York here. You see all sorts of things as you're growing up that stick in your mind. And the next poem I'm going to read is about those early days. The kind of thing you'd see with people over in England, we call them nutters, crazy people you just see everywhere. And I was always fascinated by these people. I remember sitting upstairs. So I refer to some of these things in the poem. There was this bloke on a bus, and he was just sitting there, a crowded top deck of a bus, and he's just sitting in an empty seat next to him, and he was in front of me. And he was just repeating comedians' names, not talking to anyone. And he'd just sort of sit there, he'd just go, Charlie Chaplin. And everyone would try and keep a straight face, you know, oh my God. There you go. Jimmy Durante. So this went on. These kind of guys were rife where I came from. Kind of thing, I'd take my bus from a place called the Pier Head, which was down by the river. I mainly went down there to get it because I could make sure I had a good seat on the bus. Otherwise, when it reached the school, it was packed. So I used to go down there, and it was like the speaker's corner. There would be the people arguing about religion. This kind of thing stuck with me, and that's in the poem. Memories like my mother was a midwife, so our house was always being built. She was always being moved out to the new territory, like pioneers. I remember this dog called Prince with one eye. Anyway, all these memories are in the poem. It's called In Liverpool. I spent my early life in Liverpool, something I'm not likely to forget. People blend with places, faces that I know but never met. Upstairs on a bus behind a man, talking to himself, or so it seemed, repeating names of old comedians and laughing at them. Down the pier head where the preachers meet, each of them his own imagined crowd, giving us his version of the book that God had written. In a house before they built the road, raising jam jars for a worthy cause, Prince, the dog, with one eye to his name, wants to follow. By the sports field of the Institute lives Soft Sid, the harmless village fool, greeting children who pass the other side, saying, "Hello, children." Listening to the bin man holding court, promising to buy a brand new bike, king of little children for a day. He gives them money. Walking with the boys of Dungeon Lane, aimlessly towards a muddy shore, telling tales about the Chinese farm and getting captured. I spent my early days in Liverpool, something I'm not likely to forget. People blend with places and the faces that I know but never met in Liverpool.
People are asking also, at what point will you come to grips in song with some of the things you do here in poem?
Well, I think, since putting the book out, that started to interest me, because some of them are prospective lyrics. Some of the ones...
the poems may very well become lyrics.
Yeah, some of them have a kind of song form that could easily move, I could put a tune to them, which is something I've not really done too much. There's only one or two of my songs I've ever done that, written the lyrics first, and then put a tune to it. But it's quite nice to do. I'm going to dare to read a lyric now. The first line of this refers to the study of pataphysics, which I think was invented by Alfred Jarry, a French Dadaist. And it's not a real science. In fact, I think the Society of Pataphysicians, their most important position is the chair of beer. So he's got my vote. Here we go. This is called Maxwell's Silver Hammer. Joan was quizzical, studied pataphysical science in the home. Late nights, all alone with a test tube. Oh, ho, ho, ho. Maxwell Edison, majoring in medicine, calls her on the phone. "Can I take you out to the pictures, Joan?" But as she's getting ready to go, a knock comes on the door. Bang, bang, Maxwell's silver hammer came down upon her head. Bang, bang, Maxwell's silver hammer made sure that she was dead. Back in school again, Maxwell plays the fool again. Teacher gets annoyed. Wishing to avoid an unpleasant scene, she tells Max to stay when the class has gone away. So he waits behind, writing 50 times, "I must not be so, oh ho ho." But when she turns her back on the boy, he creeps up from behind. Bang, bang, Maxwell's silver hammer came down upon her head. Bang, bang, Maxwell's silver hammer made sure that she was dead. There's more. PC-31 said, "We've caught a dirty one." Maxwell stands alone, painting testimonial pictures, oh, ho, ho, ho. Rose and Valerie, screaming from the gallery, that could be a can of worms. We'll cut that, okay? All right, Rose and Valerie, screaming from the gallery, say he must go free. The judge does not agree, and he tells them so, oh ho ho. But as the words are leaving his lips, a noise comes from behind. Bang, bang, Maxwell's silver hammer came down upon his head. Bang, bang, Maxwell's silver hammer made sure that he was dead. also working on a new album of songs, which I just was out in... You haven't heard it yet. It could be a disaster.
So what's the nature of the album?
That's what I would call regular songs. That's
regular songs?
Well, as opposed to, accompanied by a symphony orchestra.
Oh, I see.
Songs. I had quite a few lying around and been writing stuff over the last couple of years. And I hooked up with a new producer who we get on very well. And I wasn't sure how well I was going to like him, in fact. So I thought I'll just do 2 weeks with him, just in case it all goes pear-shaped.
Yeah.
So, but it was great. We went out to Los Angeles and worked for 2 weeks with 3 musicians who were new to me, great guys. And we had a lot of fun. And over the 2 weeks, we did, I think, 18 songs. So we just went on fire, we just, boy, so fast. And it was nice because I said to him, he said, how do you want to do this? I said, well, I'll tell you what, how's about if I don't show you any of the songs, I don't tell you anything about it. It's how we used to work in the Beatles, one of my favorite periods. So I showed up on the Monday morning and just said, okay, we're going to do this song, and kind of pulled it out of a hat. So nobody knew what was going to go, but they're such good guys, and we all know how to do it. So it came out really fresh, right onto the skillet, and it just sizzled. So it was really a lot of fun. We all just decided this is the only way to work,
Well, you once said about the Beatles, the philosophy of the Beatles was, you tell the story of the time that the bus runs into the ditch, and somebody says, what are we going to do? Someone else says, something will happen. That's the philosophy.
Well, I think it's true. I think, you can panic when those disasters happen. But I do seem to have found that something will happen, whether you like it or not. So I trust in that something. It draws me forward. So we had a great time with these guys. And things that you couldn't write happen in these sessions. I got a phone call about one of the guys, and we're just chatting and saying, how's he going and stuff. And he said his doctors just told him he's got too much iron in his blood. Yeah. His name is Rusty.
That's a song?
It's true. He said, my doctors just told me I got too much iron in my blood. I don't know what to say to you, Rusty.
Let me go back to the beginning for a few minutes. Who were the influences? I mean, you've heard this 1,000 times, but who were the people that influenced you vocally? Was it Elvis? Was it somebody else?
Yeah, singing, it was Elvis and Little Richard. Probably my main 2 influences, singing. And then, as far as things like poetry were concerned and lyrics, I had a really inspirational English teacher. He's a really cool guy. I talk to people, and often people have got one teacher who does the job. He turns them on to the subject. And luckily for me, this was an English teacher. So I did well at English literature, whereas I think if I hadn't had him, I wouldn't have done. His name was Alan Durband, and he had a class, it was an old boys' school, he had a class of 16-year-old Liverpool boys who were not interested in poetry.
Yeah, right.
Interested in other things, but not poetry. Rock and roll, sex, etc.
Right. Sex, rock and roll, sex.
Any order. But what he did, he started off, he said, I'm going to teach you about Chaucer, great English poet. And he started doing it in the old language rather than the translation. So he started the lesson, he said, Hir wimpel pinched was. And we're all going, excuse me? So of course we had no interest at all, but he said, look, what you want to do is, there's a great translation of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales by a fellow called Neville Coghill. He said, you want to get hold of this, and you want to look at the Miller's Tale. He said, you'll find it really interesting. Well, I got it. It's the dirtiest bit of writing I've ever read.
Yes.
And I tell my kids, friends, when they come round, and I try and introduce them to poetry, I say, get hold of the Millerstown. And I tell them what's in it. They think I'm a dirty old pervert.
Well, suppose they knew that you're also sketching out nudes at about the same time.
Exactly. I don't
My
tell
dad
them
was
that.
into it early.
Yeah, well, you know. Yeah. I think it's just normal reaction in a young boy.
Who was responsible for, after you put the group together?
Yeah.
Did you both decide roles in terms of writing songs? Did it just come together?
No, John had the group together already.
This was Everymen, or was this?
It was called the Quarrymen.
Quarrymen, right.
Quarrymen. And that was because he went to a school called Quarry Bank.
Yeah.
So they were the Quarrymen. And this village fete that I refer to in the poem Ivan was where I met John. That's where I saw them. And because I sang 20 Flight Rock and remembered all the words, that single deed was enough for them to ask me into the group. They were desperate, I suppose.
But you knew those lyrics. You knew that song.
I said, let me think about it.
You were hard to get.
I thought about it for a couple of days, just to play hard to get, you know. And I eventually joined the group. So it was John's group, really. And then as it grew, we talked about what to do. And John and I found ourselves as the two writing partners. This next piece is a lyric. And John and I hadn't seen each other for a while. Thank God, before he died, we did make up. So I was really happy about that, because to have not done that would have been terrible for me. But after all our battles, we were making up, and I made up a song, an imaginary conversation with him. It refers to crying. That was one night when we were on tour, and we got diverted from Jacksonville, where we were supposed to play, because of a hurricane. So we had to go down and spend a night in Key West. And so we didn't see much of it, but we kind of stayed up all night and drank and talked and did all crazy things. Ended up crying. It's called Here Today. And if I said I really knew you well, what would your answer be if you were here today? Well, knowing you, you'd probably laugh and say that we were worlds apart if you were here today. But as for me, I still remember how it was before, and I'm holding back the tears no more. I love you. What about the time we met? Well, I suppose that you could say that we were playing hard to get, didn't understand a thing, but we could always sing. What about the night we cried? Because there wasn't any reason left to keep it all inside. Never understood a word, but you were always there with a smile. And if I say I really loved you and was glad you came along, then you were here today, for you were in my song.
What's the best thing you wrote?
Best thing we wrote? I don't know. It's impossible. I always say to people, it's like your babies. You shouldn't choose between them.
Is Yesterday the best thing you wrote?
I don't know that Yesterday's the best thing I ever wrote. It was the flukiest thing I ever wrote, because it was a dream, and I just woke up and I had the melody in my head. And it's done amazingly well. It's done better. It's been covered by, I think, about 3,000 people have done it.
I think it's the most recorded song ever.
It's been very recorded. So, you know, in that respect, so I suppose you'd say it's the best. But I think I probably prefer other songs, actually. I think I like Here, There, and Everywhere better as a song.
Why?
I think it seems a bit more crafted. You know, as a songwriter or writing poetry or anything, the fun is, for me, is that I find myself being a craftsman. And I like craftsmen. I like a guy who can put together a nice chair. I admire that.
Yeah.
So I like that I can do that kind of thing. So Here, There and Everywhere does a thing that I like in songs. It folds back in on itself. So an old song that I love is Cheek to Cheek, that Fred Astaire used to sing.
Right.
And it goes, heaven, I'm in heaven, and it goes through the middle. Dance with me, the charms about you will carry me through to heaven.
Heaven, I'm in heaven, and my heart beats so that I can hardly speak, and I seem to find the happiness I seek when we're out together dancing cheek to cheek.
It comes back and it's just, yes, so neat the way it just folds back into itself.
In fact, you have said that one day you'd like to do an album of those kinds of songs.
It'd be great. I do love those songs. Yeah. I'm a big fan of Fred's and Nat King Cole and those people. They're just such great craftsmen, and yeah, it would be nice to do. But Here, There, and Everywhere does that. It folds back through the middle eight, folds back into everywhere. There
was a while after the breakup of the Beatles that you did not play any, you did not perform any Beatles songs.
Yeah.
Why was that?
As I say, the most difficult thing to follow in following the Beatles was that it's almost impossible. And from inside the Beatles, we always used to think, when people used to say, this band's going to be the next Beatles, we think you shouldn't have said that. Yeah. It's a real hard thing to live up to, and the bands hated it. It was often the record company would say it. So when I found myself kind of in that position, of trying to follow the Beatles, it was quite a daunting task. Yeah. So I thought that the only way to do it really was to just strike out on a new path and not rely on old material, even though I loved it. Just to try and get a new repertoire.
As a solo artist?
With Wings.
Yeah, with Wings.
Yeah. We ended up here in America with a huge successful tour.
There was another tour in 1989, a world tour.
Yeah.
In which you went back. Mm-hmm. You began to sing some, including Sgt. Pepper's Band.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, after a point you think, well, I proved that it can be done, and so it'd be good now to revisit the old stuff. And I love it. As I said, it's good stuff. Something like Sgt. Pepper's is a good audience song. It addresses the audience. It talks to the audience. So it's a good song to sing for an audience. Plus, of course, I have to admit, those are the songs of mine that people know best.
Of course.
And if I go to a concert, I probably want to hear them do the songs I want to hear them do. So when they start doing their new album, I go,
It's so happy to see an artist say that. It's true.
It's true, but you can't keep just rehashing the old stuff, so you've got to try the new stuff. Yeah. And so audiences don't always like it. But so I started doing some of the old stuff, and I liked it, and they liked it.
But you don't just go back to the old stuff of the Beatles, but you also go back to some of those early influences, people.
Some old rock and roll.
When you did Run, Devil, Run.
Yeah.
you
rock and roll thing, yeah.
The rock and roll stuff is always there for you.
Yeah, it's where I started in music. It's my first influence. And I think, those teenage years are so exciting. I found them very exciting. They're your formative years. And there's nothing like that thrill for me of Elvis Presley's first album. Everything else he did after that, for me, was never quite as good. Just because it's just so exciting. And that period of how he was with an audience, I just found so intriguing. He was having fun with it all, just cheeky, and he's so great. And then later, he goes to Vegas and gets the rhinestone and loses me.
He lost you then. You couldn't identify.
It's not my favorite period. No, the only bit I like out of that was when he got carried away one time. I think he was on fairly heavy drugs by this point, and he does this famous thing where he's a song I used to do, actually. I did it one performance and got laughed off the stage by the band, actually, by the Beatles.
Yeah, behind you. Yeah.
I tried to do Are You Lonesome Tonight? Which is good. Are you lonesome tonight? Great. But then there's like a little monologue in the middle of it. You know, they say the world's a stage, and the band is like falling off.
Somebody stop him.
That's it. I'm never doing that, thank God.
Yeah.
But Elvis goes into that monologue.
Yeah.
And he forgets it. And I must say, I like that.
Yeah, that's a good moment.
He just loses it. I think the problem was he closes his eyes. Yeah. And I think, you know, by then I think it was well known that he was on all sorts of stimulants and stuff. So he goes, you know, I say, and I think that's when he's got, whoa. Yes. And he starts going, fuzzy wuzzy was a bear. Fuzzy wuzzy. And I'm going, yes. But outside that, I like the early stuff.
Yeah, you would open some concerts doing Honey Hush.
Yeah. That was a good song.
Because it's a great song.
Good song, yeah. A chilling lyric in the last verse that I hadn't remembered. He says, this is Johnny Burnett. It's a rock and roll song, Honey Hush. Last verse, he says, don't make me nervous. I'm holding a baseball bat. Straight to the point. Come into this house. Stop all that yakety yak.
Is there anything creatively you've wanted to do you haven't done? Creatively. You've done symphonies, you paint, now poetry.
Unfortunately, there's a lot of stuff creatively that I haven't done.
Why not?
And that I would like to do.
Time?
Yeah, it's just also, you know, I'm a little wary of being Renaissance man who does this, and this. So I try and restrain that thing, you know, I sort of think, better try and pace it, you know, so I don't come out with too many things. But there are lots of things. I can never think of them when someone asks me that question.
Do you care about critics?
Critics, no, but they... No, I don't really. I find myself, you know, sometimes if you're at a dinner party with some friends, particularly when you're with artists, they get too much time. We talk about them too much. And I have to sort of say, okay, they had enough time, let's get off them. You know, the trouble about critics is that I would always like them to better what I do. I would be convinced if they could say, you know, that's a crap song, and here's a better one that I just wrote. I never can. So, you know, I try not to read them, good or bad.
It's a little bit like saying, you know, if you're so smart, let's see your song.
Yeah, you know, really. You know, I understand the need for them, almost.
Yeah.
But
you especially expect it when you do this. I mean, this is not your primary.
No. Well, that's it. You know,
place.
I mean, like I said, you know, I have a passion for things, and if I've got some poems together, or paintings, for instance, you mentioned before, I try as long as I can to keep them in the closet. Because I am a little bit worried about, you know, who he does this, look at him here, look at him here.
It's the dilettante aspect.
Yeah, you know, I try and sort of just not be too in your face with all these different things. But I think there comes a time when you've got a stack of stuff. And what occurs to me then is I think, you know, there might be people out there who'd like to read this or like to see this. In fact, I know there'll be people out there who'd like to see what I've been doing. You know, if I say, oh, I write some poetry, I know there'll be some people.
Yeah.
So it's for them that I put the books out, and for me, but it's because I know they might like to look at it, And if I don't put it out, they don't get a chance.
Same thing is true about painting, as you said. Yeah. You started painting because what?
Well, I used to paint and draw and stuff at school, and enjoyed art. But I was very nervous, not just the sort of doing this and that aspect, but I was also very nervous of saying, I'm a painter. You know, I think a lot of people have blocks with those kind of things, and I had a big one, which was like, oh, what do you do? You know, we've got to think about it now. It must be deep, it must be meaningful, it must be serious, it must be good, it must be effective, it must touch people. And that list just seemed too daunting, so I thought, you know, I always put it off. But I met, through Linda and her dad, Lee, the painter Willem de Kooning, who's a great, great guy, fantastic painter. A round of applause for Willem.
Willem de Kooning.
All right. And I was privileged to be able to go out to his studio and to watch him paint. And it was very liberating watching him paint. And what happened one day was his assistant said, Bill wants to give you and Linda a picture. So we thought about it, and he's got these huge canvases that we haven't got room for. We haven't got that big a house. And also we thought it would just be a bit unseemly to say, I'll have that $1 million sucker over there.
Yes. So, if you're going to give me one, give me a good one.
Big one. So there was a little one that was lying on the floor that he'd hand framed. And it was a thing he used to do. He used to take copies of the New York Times, used to do a pull. If he had too much paint on the canvas, he'd put the New York Times on and pull it off, kind of get a new painting. And he'd lie that around and forget about it. But sometimes he liked those. And this one he liked a lot. And he'd framed it. And so we said, well, we'd love that one. I don't know if you want to give that one. And he said, oh, sure, I'd love to, sure. So we were looking at it and thanking him for it. And I plucked up all my courage. I said, Bill, this may seem like a stupid question, because he's great abstract expressionist painter. I said, this may seem like a stupid question, but I said, but what is it? And he looked.
What have you painted?
What is it? And he looked and he said, I don't know. Right. He said, looks like a couch, huh? Yeah. Oh, boom. I thought, I can paint. I can do it. I said, I
can do it. So you went home, you got a
before I got home, I went and bought canvases. I bought canvases. I painted, and I've never stopped ever since.
But you didn't show them for a long time.
I didn't show them for about 15 years.
Some German gallery owner or something.
Yeah, German gallery owner heard I had these.
So he comes to you and says, let's have an exhibition.
Yeah.
That wasn't, what, several years ago?
Yeah, it was a few years ago now.
Yeah. And were you nervous about this?
Well, yeah, the thing about it was that some people had said to me, when they heard I painted, they said, I'll give you an exhibition. I said, but you haven't seen the work yet. They said, it doesn't matter. So, you know, they just wanted to give my name an exhibition.
Yeah, of course.
So I said, no thanks, you know, and I was passed on that. But this bloke said, I'd like to come and look at your work, and I'd like to think about it and stuff. And if I think it's good enough, I'd like to give you an exhibition.
For a long time, you didn't sell any.
Sorry?
For a long time, you didn't sell any.
I still haven't. A real long time.
Not one?
No. I don't sell them.
But
you know, I mean, some of my friends who are painters say, you know, you should sell them to great collectors, and you should get around a bit. Yeah. But I don't really want to, and my kids don't want me to.
Just because it's family.
Well, I think it's family. It's like Dad's paintings. You know, we'll keep them. I don't know. I might do one day. I don't know. You know, I just haven't. It's not something that's cropped up yet.
Would you have wanted one of the kids to be a musician?
I would be happy if I don't mind what the kids do. As long as they're happy. You know, it's got to be just something they love to do. My son James is a very good musician, and he may want to enter the fray. But you know, it's a difficult thing because inevitably people will compare his work with mine, and I think you often find that. So, but you know, he may not give a damn, and he may just decide he wants to do it. My kids are all very musical, actually.
Mary and Stella both?
Yeah, they're all very good. Heather, yeah, they love music, and they're good singers. They hold a tune very well.
Running throughout the great 30 years you had with Linda, is this sense that she made a difference beyond the love and the bonding of the family, but did she push you to do interesting things? That she was a freeing and a real influence?
I think she freed me to do interesting things. I think I maybe had a tendency to think too much about things. I mean, some people would say it's a merit. But for me, you know, I might say, oh, should I, I don't know. And she made it easy for me to say, yeah, I can do that. She sort of liberated me that way. She was a very liberating woman. Again, like the de Kooning thing, it often just takes one moment. I remember when we'd done a session with the Beatles, and it was our early days, we were kind of just dating, and I met her the morning after this session, and we wanted to go for a drive outside London. And I was unshaven, I was very tired and looking rough, and I was a bit ashamed of this, and I looked over to her in the car, and I said, I'm sorry, but I said, I'm not shaved, I'm sorry, I look really rough, I'm tired and everything. She looked over and she said, it's allowed.
That's freeing. That's freeing.
I said, that's it.
That's mine. Yeah.
And you know, that's it. It's allowed. There's no law against it. And once you think that, it allows you to do an awful lot of stuff. It's allowed.
Pretty soon you knew right then that you had a soulmate.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. And influenced you musically to take chances and to...
I think so. I mean, I was pretty liberated musically anyway.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, she would help me take chances. If an offer like the poetry book came along,
yeah.
she would say, you must do it. She would say, you should do this. There's one, can I read just one, just off the cuff here?
Please.
There's one that kind of explains that. It's the kind of thing she'd do. She would just, what page is it on? Here we go.
Which one? I may have it marked.
Talk amongst yourselves. There's another 30 minutes coming here, Charlie.
See, he said that. I know.
No, this is one that was occasioned by that kind of thing happening. It's called Blessed. I said, I would come back from a run with lines of poetry to tell, and having listened, she would say, what a mind. She'd fold my words inside her head, and though the lines may not have been supreme, she wasn't merely being kind. She meant it, what she said. And I'm blessed, for she said, what a mind.
Well, what do you look forward to now?
I look forward to enjoying myself. It's one of the great things for me. It seems a bit sort of corny sometimes when people say that, but years ago when we studied meditation with the Maharishi in India, we had a real good time, and I always felt it was a very valuable experience, and it was a process that you can always go back to if you're in a turmoil. It's a centering process that I like a lot. And he gave us his book, the great wise man gave us his book, because he was one of the ones that wasn't a fake. Yeah. There were a lot of them around that time who were into Rolls Royces and chicks. And
come here.
He wasn't one of them. And he gave us his book, and I looked to see what he would write besides putting his name in it. And he wrote about, he said, radiate bliss consciousness. And then at the end of it, he just put, enjoy. And I always thought that was really cool coming from him. And I actually met him quite recently, just about a year and a half ago, I think. He lives in the Netherlands now. And he is a spry old codger. He's in his 80s,
Yeah.
and he's still working. He's still spreading the message.
He's still a Maharishi, and
He's still going. And I took Stella, my daughter, and James, my son, with me. And I said, would it be okay if we all came to see you? And they said, yeah, okay. So we went in for a meeting with him. And they said, we don't know how long you'll have. You know, it could be over quite quick. We don't know, whether he's tired, he'll get tired quickly, whatever. In the end, it was 4 hours. We just sat chatting for 4 hours. We just had a good old time. But before we went in, Stella said to me, she said, Dad, I got my video camera. Do you think I can shoot a bit of video? I said, well, I don't know. I don't know what the scene is here. I said, but give it to me. I'll put it in my pocket. And at the end of our session, I'll just ask him.
Yes.
I said, is it okay? Well, of course, so the session came and Stella goes, video.
Good stuff.
So I said,
yeah, good Stella.
I said, Maharishi, I said, would it be okay if we just shot a little bit of video? And he giggled and he said, yeah, of course, So I gave Stella the camera, and she says, she lines it up. She says, okay, Maharishi, what have you got to say for the camera? She's got
a very fine director she is.
And he looks right in the camera. He says, enjoy. It's 30 years later, pretty consistent. So that's what I'm looking forward to. I think that's what life's for. I think if you can enjoy it, you're, as we say in England, quids in.
Quids in.
You're, if at the end of a day you can say, I enjoyed that day, I think you're doing okay. So, I have lots of passions. I have my music, I have poetry, I have painting, lots of things I love. And so I look forward to the future and enjoying it.
Blackbird Singing, Poems and Lyrics, 1965 to 1999. Yesterday is here, Hey Jude is here, as well as these poems that you have heard Paul McCartney read this evening. Thank you for sharing this time.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
LegalizeFreedom.com. Why are we here? Where do we come from? Where are we going? From the nature of reality to the future of humanity. Beyond politics, poverty and war. LegalizeFreedom.com.
Greetings and welcome once again to LegalizeFreedom.com. I'm your host Greg Moffat, and my guest today is Paul Rosenberg of Freeman'sPerspective.com, who joins us to discuss the rise and fall of civilizations. Over the ages, great civilizations and mighty empires have come and gone in a remarkably similar pattern. From Sumer to Egypt and from Greece to Rome, all have crashed from triumph to tragedy. The British built the largest empire in history, only to see it disintegrate in the aftermath of war. Since then, the USA has assumed the mantle of the world's dominant power, winning a war of attrition against the former Soviet Union whilst waging real and increasingly bloody wars for resources right across the globe. But are the days of the American empire numbered? Has it fallen prey to corruption, greed, hubris and arrogance like so many before it? Is a new power waiting in the wings to take its place? Or does the decline of US dominance mark the beginning of the end of industrial civilization as we know it? Hello and welcome, Paul, and thank you so much for joining us today on LegalizeFreedom.com.
Oh, my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Now, Paul, today we're going to discuss some of your work over at your website, freemansperspective.com, where you publish a newsletter. And currently, no one out there will be unaware of the fact that we're living in times of great upheaval and change globally. Chaos and confusion everywhere, whether it's climate change, war, terrorism, economic collapse, where we're being assaulted on all fronts. And you published a special report recently on your website called The Great Calendar, when this outlines the entropy cycles of civilizations. And these are cycles that govern the rise and fall of civilizations, but they take place over very long time scales, and as such are very difficult for most of us to observe. For one, we're too narrowly focused on all the problems just mentioned. You give a great example. If people could imagine if the seasons were 400 years long, all we would know would be how the season was. And it would be very hard for us to believe that things could be any other way. Now, this profoundly affects our view of our own civilization and where it's headed if we have that attitude. But if we can grasp the scope and the nature of the cycles in this great calendar, apply it to ourselves as individuals, to our institutions, which together make up society, we can gain a perspective that makes great sense of our predicament and gives us insight not only into the developments we can expect going forward, but into action that we can take.
Well said. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's important, if for nothing else, than our own reducing our own internal stress and increasing our personal happiness, because the world makes at least some sense and you can understand what's going on. You might not like it particularly in all cases, but at least you understand what's going on and you're not being buffeted by forces that you can't see coming.
And crucially, you point out that these seasons of empire, or cycles of civilization that basically operate as work, entropy, failure and recharge, these are nothing new. From Sumer to Egypt, from Greece and Rome, this has happened again and again in history. And you also highlight how the golden ages of empires, that is to say when they're seemingly at the peak of their powers, how close that point can be to the beginning of terminal decline or even outright collapse.
Right, exactly. The great golden ages that people think of, if you actually look at it on a timeline, it's shocking that the golden ages come just before the whole thing is going to collapse. And all of the monuments, I like Rome as an example because it's the closest to us in time and it's the closest to us more or less in temperament. That's not really true, but, something like that. And if you look at all the things we think of as Rome, the Colosseum, the Pantheon, all of these great monuments, they all came not in the Republic, but in the Empire. And as the Empire is just coming over the crest and ready to go downhill fast. And it's the same thing in Greece. It's the same thing in all of them. It's a shocking thing the first time you kind of see, all these things are happening just before things go bad. That's weird, but it's true.
Perhaps we could, most of us who've been taking high school science of some form or other might remember the word entropy cropping up there. Perhaps you just say something about that to define that in terms of the scenario that you're setting out.
Sure. People sometimes mistakenly think of entropy as a loss of energy. It's not a loss of energy. It's a dispersion of energy. I use the example in the report of a glass, and you pour into a glass of water and you put into it a bunch of ice cubes. Well, as soon as, let's say, one big piece of ice hits the water, there's a massive temperature difference between the surface of the ice and the water next to it. And if you had a properly designed motor, you could put that motor in place and do a lot of work with it. But as the temperatures even out in the glass over, let's say, an hour or 2 hours or whatever it may be, all of a sudden you can't get any more work out of that motor because there's no difference in temperature. Everything is evened out. The energy has dispersed. And what we then say is that the entropy in the glass has increased. There's no way to get work out of it anymore. The same amount of heat is still there. You just can't use it anymore. That's what entropy is.
What we might call the first stage, even though it is a cycle that goes round and round, but if we call the first stage of this, you label it as devolution and the long minima. An analogy for this, or an example of this, we might think of as the Dark Ages, though you point out it's perhaps a little unfair to call the Dark Ages dark. This stage is the aftermath of collapse of a civilization. At an institutional level, the characteristics of empire are basically reversed. All that stuff that was built up basically goes into reverse. And at an individual level, we see a loss of identity because we come to identify with the institutions of government, of empire. But also during this stage, you get the first seeds of regeneration also.
Right. It's actually a very interesting time and shockingly long. One of the interesting facts is that what we think of as the Dark Ages were not the only Dark Ages. There was a Dark Age of the Greeks that lasted from about 1200 to 800 BC, and it was shockingly long, and so was our Dark Age of, roughly 400 years. Why so long? Well, a big part of it is the fact that people identify so closely with the rulers of their place and time. I mean, we both know how rampant that is nowadays. No matter what country you're in, they think that they're special because of whatever. The French have their reasons, the English and Americans have theirs, the Japanese have their reasons. They all have reasons to think we're the special ones. And of course, governments cultivate that because they need people to identify with them. If they don't, they're hard to rule. So this really is a psychological blow when the empire, whatever it is, fails. People feel abandoned and don't know how to reset themselves. And it takes a surprisingly long period of time for them to do so. And that's, really what the Dark Ages or these reset periods are.
Now, of course, you mentioned there the idea of people thinking they're special. And I think that you could almost apply that to our civilization globally in a way, because talk of the collapse of Rome or the decline of Rome and the Dark Ages, people have a very hard time thinking that anything like that could happen again. They just kind of think, well, our civilization isn't perfect, but it's near as we're going to get. And this is it now. We've arrived. We've learned the lessons of the past, and it's onwards and upwards, even if it's a bit bumpy.
No, I would to God that were true. The fact is that we are doing precisely what Rome did. If you take a look, I have better American numbers than anything else, being that I spent most of my life there and I understand it very well. But if you take a look at the chart of the value of US dollar and the value of a Roman denarius, they're the same chart. And if you get quotes from people who were in the middle of the decline of Rome, they say the same things that are going on now. There's one particular gentleman named Salvian the Presbyter, wrote in, about 440 AD. He wrote a book called On the Governance of God. But in any event, he complains about the same sorts of things that people do now, saying the government didn't think anything about what they were spending. They were beyond broke, and they just kept spending like crazy men. And nobody wanted to think about it because, it was too confusing and too hard to face. The same exact. You could put the quote and just, fix up the language a little bit, and it would be the same thing people would say now. And there's all sorts of things like that. Rome went crazy with taxation at the end because what they were doing was failing. Well, it's the same thing now. I know it's the same in the UK as it is in America. If you're a productive person, you're paying easily half of your production. It's getting taken away from you every year in income taxes. You guys have the VAT, and in 100 other taxes and fees, seen and unseen, not to mention inflation. So, our taxation levels are astronomical compared to what they were 100 years ago. And the same thing happened in Rome. The same thing happened in Greece, and on and on. It's the same pattern. The details vary, but the pattern is the same.
Mentioning Rome, actually, in the situation with the currency there, I mean, we'll come back to currency debasement in a bit, but just while you're talking about Rome, it's interesting that an ounce of gold, what that would have bought you in Roman times, will more or less buy you the same sort of thing today.
Right, absolutely true. It holds its value very, very well. If anybody wants to see a really interesting set of charts on it, go to a website called pricedingold.com. And they've got all sorts of priced, charts of things measured in gold rather than measured in dollars or something like that. Very interesting.
Now, once we get to going back to the great cycle again, once we get past the Dark Age stage, as it were, we then move into another stage that you call production and first consolidations. And this is the real signs of rebuilding taking place. Right. And this, of course, is where power structures begin to re-emerge, and inevitably conflict does as well. But importantly, it's really limited in its scale and scope. It's generally sort of local, so it's not such a problem. So therefore, government and the conflict that they generate aren't really getting in the way. It really is at a time for rebuilding.
Oh, absolutely. This is where people have become confident in themselves and in what they believe and in what they stand for. And they are willing to take initiative. They're not waiting for some, big lord or king or whatever royal guy to give them permission, or to say it's okay for us to do this now, or to lead them into something new. They're just looking at what needs to be done and creating it themselves. This is how the common law of England really began. This is how the Hanseatic League of trading began after our dark ages, and 100 other things. It was people felt confident in who they were and what they believed in, to simply go out and do what they thought was important to be done, rather than waiting around for approvals or permissions or for somebody to point it out to them. It's a big difference and a very, very important one.
So say, for example, the last time, if we take where we've arrived now as being at sort of a final stage, the production and first consolidation stage, when would you have placed that, over the last few centuries? What period was that?
Well, I'm looking at this period as somewhere around 1000 AD, where Western civilization really takes shape and has its own confidence. It is a new and separate thing. What's interesting that comes right before it is an interest in philosophy, which nowadays is kind of, who really cares about philosophy nowadays? And those who do, are usually, speaking about very strange, metaphysics and epistemology and funny things that most of us don't understand. But at those times, it's a big deal because people have lost their old intellectual partner, that is the Roman Empire, and they have to come up with something new. And that's why Europe changed from pagan Europe to Christian Europe in just a number of centuries, because at that moment, people did care about philosophy, and Christianity was simply a better set of ideas.
Beyond that stage, we then get into what you label as progressive growth and unification. And this is when the institutions start to gain much more significance and the state becomes something that is difficult to avoid. And actually, right. This in many ways is where the rot sets in.
Oh, absolutely. As states get larger, they begin to get a much stronger legitimacy. They want people and succeed in getting people to hold them as great legitimate entities. In our Western civilization, power in the early days, again, 1000 AD, 1200 AD, even 1400 AD, power was not territorial power. It was based upon individuals. The lord of this area, the lord of that area, and power was defined in personal relationships, not in territorial domination. And you would absolutely know the person who was in charge of your area, and you probably wouldn't know the person that he had to deal with above him. Once you get to territorial domination, they really need people to think of them as special or legitimate, that it's God wants them to do this, or whatever the justification is, to take your money, because most people don't really give things willingly like that. So legitimacy is a real big thing, and this is where legitimacy begins to take hold, and it's where things really start to go downhill.
Now, of course, today we think of the idea of power being taken by force as something back in the days of Robin Hood or something like that. There's really, today in most, certainly developed world, we have democratic governments, one form or another, and things aren't done by force unless you're an out-and-out lawbreaker. But in many ways, a lot of the institutions that we have they're really just monarchies of the past that have morphed into something else. It's almost like some of the kings and queens have stepped down or stepped into the shadows. And the idea of there being no force, I often say to people, well, you'd be amazed at the list of things that you could come up with, that you don't have to deviate very far from the norm before force is brought to bear on you. So we do live under regimes that coerce and use force.
Yes, absolutely. A friend of mine made a very good point one day. He says, look at your local town, wherever you are, and you've got a SWAT team. Think about what this is. This is a large armored van with men wearing special high-tech armor, carrying automatic weapons and sticks and shields and pepper spray and everything else, and are trained to assault human beings. Now, they tell you that they're always going after drug dealers and murderers, so, well, you think that's okay. What about if they went after somebody else? It's the same mechanism. What if they decided they were going to go after gay guys? What if they decided they were going to go after the Jews again? What if they, whomever, pick on your group? It's the same mechanism. It's the same overwhelming use of force. The only difference is who's it directed to. And right now, most people think that it's directed well. But what if it isn't? It's the same force. It's there all the time. And it's much greater now than it ever has been in the past. There are so many different police departments. There are so many jails and so many people in jails for doing non-violent things. A 19-year-old kid who's smoking some pot. And they're going to lock this kid away in a jail cell? If you don't think it's a good thing to do, talk to the young man and tell him that convince him that it's not good for him. You don't lock him in a cage. But we have a very, very violent society on both sides of the Atlantic. But it's authorized violence, so people kind of think it's okay because it must be the good guys. Well, not always and not necessarily.
Now, I'm not trying to say that the suspects, and let's just remind ourselves they are suspects in the recent Boston bombing incident, are good guys. However, you saw the mobilization of force when they were trying to track them down. I mean, they had, 10,000 troops, helicopters, armored cars? I mean, you could have reenacted the Battle of the Bulge with the hardware that they had out there.
Oh, absolutely. And the story that came out today, and I haven't followed that closely enough to really have a firm opinion outside of just, the event was horrific. But it turns out that one of the friends of the supposed bombers, they killed him. The FBI agents killed him, and he wasn't armed, and he appeared not to have been threatening them. They killed him anyway. But as so many Americans have this idea, no, the FBI are the good guys. Our armed federal agents are the good guys. A lot of them won't want to question it because it calls too much into question.
Now, I read an interesting thing not that long ago regarding the Middle Ages and sort of feudal times, and not very many people, certainly I think if you did a vox pop on the street, would say they'd feel that they'd be better off living in those times. But there's some arguments that in some ways people were. I mean, they might have had sort of, poverty and deprivation up to a point, but in terms of the, coercion and force that was brought to bear on them, they were kind of left to their own devices a lot more, because if you then had a very visible king or overlord, he wanted to pass on something to his heirs. He was sort of directly responsible because he was there for life. So he couldn't destroy and ransack everything because there would be nothing to hand on, and his own survival could be threatened. And if he pushed his people too hard, for example, with taxation, that would also backfire. He needed to just squeeze them just enough for what they would put up with, maybe 5% a year, something like that, so he could live off it. But there was more of a deal and understanding that, he had an army, and he lived there in his castle, and people, scratched their living out in the fields. But there was a kind of a standoff that worked. And now you have governments that are elected for short periods of time. And what they seem to be about is getting what they can before handing over, the wreckage to the next lot.
There's a lot of important stuff that you just said right there. That's absolutely true. Now we wouldn't want to go back in time because we have technology that we really, really like. Everything from medicine to air conditioning, we wouldn't want to give it up, understandably. But leaving aside technology, we were far freer in our daily lives in 1000 BC than we are now. Immensely freer in our daily lives. The truth is that there are a lot of people that are living in, the Philippines, Bulgaria, other Eastern European countries, and on a daily basis, they're far freer than Americans are, or that people in the UK are. They have far less intrusions in their lives. They're left alone to live their lives as they wish. It's absolutely true. And the king was responsible. He was personally responsible. Whereas now, kind of everyone's responsible and really nobody's responsible, because supposedly it's, well, all of us who are making the decisions, not guys in the back room, who are letting out the contracts and, to their friends. Supposedly it's all of us because somehow we're making the decisions and there's no one responsible anymore. And when no one's responsible, well, people tend to behave badly.
Well, some will think, oh, well, in centuries gone by, the situations we're talking about, you were free, yeah, but, you were free to be robbed and attacked, highwaymen, bandits. But has anything really changed? That still happens. And that's what part of what freedom is. Part of freedom is the idea that someone may randomly attack you or they may rob you. That's always been the case.
It has always been the case. And it's more true now than it was then. Rates of crime are higher in our general time than they were in, let's call it 1200 AD. They really are. I mean, if you look at even the American Wild West, where supposedly there's, all these crazy guys running around shooting each other, and maybe if you're lucky, a good guy rides in to save the day. The actual levels of violence in the Wild West are lower than American cities are today. And moreover, the guys who actually shot each other were all guys who were essentially bad guys. They would, hang out at, the bar at 3 a.m. and get drunk and shoot each other. Well, the baker and the banker and the guy who runs the general store, they're not hanging out at the bad bar at 3 a.m. So it was really a non-issue in a lot of ways to average people. So we are not safer than what it was 1,000 years ago. Not even close.
Now, coming back to this great civilizational cycle again, our next stage is one that you call decline and adjustments. Talking about in context of Rome again, that's basically production is declining, productivity is declining, but state spending, on the contrary, and largesse and corruption is actually swelling. The bureaucracy is very bloated, it's very invasive, and this is when things really begin to disintegrate, and there's a culture of dependence on the state. In Rome, we saw that with bread and circuses, as you point out. Today, it's kind of like reality TV and food stamps.
Exactly. It's, different flavor, but the same thing.
And then, stage after that, systemic breakdown. And basically, in the face of corruption and collapse, people cling on to the old ideas and identities, and it's almost like the state structure needs to be preserved at all cost. And the mentality is almost like the analogy of crabs in a bucket. One crab trying to get out, they're all doomed, and one crab's trying to get out of the bucket, and it's been, seen happen. Other crabs will pull that crab back down and say, "You're not getting out, buddy. You're staying with us. We're all going down."
Right. I see this all the time in the States, and I'm sure you see it in the UK, something very similar, is that people don't want to know. Yeah, they kind of know that everything's out of control. They know that the system is a mess, but they really don't want to hear about it. They have too much going on in their life. They have enough problems already. They're too busy. They don't want to think about something else going wrong. And I think deep down, they know that this thing could just fall apart, and they are not prepared to face it, so they kind of don't want to see it. I presume you're saying something similar there?
Oh, very much so. I think it's global now, really, to a greater or lesser extent. I don't think anybody's... that's the difference between now, I suppose, and even Roman times. The Roman Empire was vast, but it wasn't global.
Right. And, with the internet, the way we all can communicate, I'm sure you do, I have friends all over the planet. Well, in the 1970s, that just wouldn't have happened. I wouldn't know these people at all, much less talk to them on a daily or very regular basis.
Now, fundamentally, people might be, if they've grasped this now, but think, well, why do we keep doing this? We've been doing civilizations rise, they collapse, and over again, as far back in recorded history as we can see. Surely we're not doomed to do that again. And you point out that it's the tension between fundamental human nature and the nature of institutions that actually drives this cycle. And institutions are set up and run by individuals, but then they take on a life of their own. The way you described, nobody's responsible. And they're supposed to exist to kind of coordinate individuals and action, but ultimately they end up crushing it.
Right. An institution, by its very nature, has to overcome the will of individuals and get people in line. A group of people can work pretty well up to about 100 folks. We all can understand each other and know each other's preferences, those sorts of things. But once you get above a certain level, the institution makes rules, and everybody has to obey the rules, and that always necessarily creates entropy. And we know this because of the things we complain about. Oh, I had to do this. It was so stupid. It didn't make any sense, but that stupid rule says I have to do it. I'm sorry. We do those things all the time. So every time you have an institution, it has to intrude upon the free action of human will. And as it gets more complex and larger institutions and a tighter web of institutions, it chokes human will and human energy until the system fails.
And we seem to have sort of endless power structures in our societies today, and a sort of a hierarchy that's just levels upon levels. And it strikes me that in a more natural, free-flowing system that was really based around human nature and what we like to do and what we don't like to do, there would be a lot less levels of hierarchy and a lot fewer power structures.
Right, and temporary hierarchies. Temporary arrangements that work for a certain group of people or for a certain amount of time, or that people move into and out of as it suits them. They would be free, not rigid, to the extent that hierarchies existed. They would, I presume some still would, but they would be much less and non-rigid.
Well, actually, that reminds me, if we think, particularly the temporary aspect, we think about the way a lot of indigenous societies were run. In terms of who led the tribe, that could quite often be temporary based on people's skills and what was called for at the time. Sometimes you might need a man of action to lead the tribe. Other times you might need a great thinker. Things could change on that basis. But also to be leader was a great privilege and a great responsibility. And quite often the people who would become the leader, would be asked to lead, would actually have to give up something. They'd be less well off in a way while they were leading, but it was because it was the great privilege and responsibility to lead the tribe, they would take it. Whereas a lot of our leaders now, it seems to be about, getting their snouts in the trough.
Isn't that the truth? But yes, in the old days, and again, these were smaller groups. So everybody knew each other. Take a group of 50 people or 100 people. You can know each other. You can interact richly with each other. I know what you like. I know what John likes. I know what Mary likes. I know if I make this decision, it'll be bad for Mary. And I can take into account all these people. Once you get above a certain number, you become a type of a dictator. And it's a completely different relationship, and it invariably leads to decreased effectiveness of humans.
Now, you outline how if we put our own predicament into this great cycle, how we're basically approaching the collapse stage, and a lot of people will find that idea resonates with them. And inevitably we ask, and people are asking, is there a way out of this? How can we do things differently? But you point out that really at this stage, reform, which is what a lot of people are talking about, is kind of futile. That the political, financial, social systems are essentially beyond repair.
Yeah, they really are. They're so overgrown and so overblown that nothing's really going to change them. And I understand people wanting to reform. By and large, they're good people, meaning well, and want life to be better for everybody. And they're trying to fix what they see as broken. And I respect that. But at this period, it doesn't work. And it doesn't work in any of the previous examples once it gets this far. I like to use the example of Rome. There were hundreds of reformers, good men and women, who wanted to reform Rome, but it never worked, and eventually it just collapsed all the same. But there was another group of people that were not trying to reform Rome. They simply ignored it. They separated from it and did their own thing. And they're the ones who came through it intact, and those were, of course, the very early Christians. I'm not speaking of the Catholic Church here. I'm speaking of the primitive, original group of Christians. And they considered Rome, all government really, to be evil, to be contrary to their new way. And they didn't try to fight it. They didn't try to reform it. They simply separated and lived their own way and tried to stay away from it. And they thrived while everything else went down. And I think now, in our time, if we want to be healthy and get through this properly, we need to stop wasting all of our time, all of our energy on politics. Watching the nightly news, following all the stories. You make yourself miserable doing this, and you really accomplish little or nothing. So I think the real answer for us in our time is just simply to separate from the system. That means different things to different people, and everyone has to work it out themselves. But just get your mind out of the system and stop thinking that politics is the most important thing in the world. It's not. It's trivial bickering of people on, fighting for the proverbial lawn chairs on the Titanic. Politics is not worth all our time, energy, and passion. There's much more important things in life, and we'd be happier if we just ignored it.
Now, just as a side point, does a more complex society necessarily result in, as it were, a longer dark age or recovery period?
That's a really good question, and it doesn't seem to be so much of a function of that. All of the societies that get to the point of collapse are pretty complex. What's interesting is what matters on the dark ages is how concentrated people are, if they have room to spread out and leave and go other places. The civilization that had the shortest sort of dark age was the Egyptians, and that was because everybody had to stay right next to the Nile. Beyond that was just desert. You couldn't go there and survive. So everybody had to stay on the Nile, and power was able to reform in maybe a couple of hundred years rather than 400, and it stopped the cycle. It shortchanged the cycle, and Egypt never got to really reset and recharge. Power formed again before it could really do that, and you can see that Egypt, after its great flower, if you will, with the pyramids and all the things we remember, it never really got going again. And that's really a big part of the reason why.
Now, you mentioned the early Christians as an example of a community, as it were, turning their back on the centralized hierarchy and system. And in terms of, people, more modern examples, people might think of intentional communities, communes, maybe some survivalist compounds or the religious variant of that. For example, the Branch Davidians at Waco, very famous case. And we know how that ended. So there's kind of a bit of a pattern emerges when people try, in our current context, when people try and take themselves away from the system in that manner.
Yeah, it can be a problem. But there have been far more intentional communities, and I'm very glad you brought that up, by the way. There have been far more intentional communities than people really realize. There are intentional communities now in the United States. There were hundreds of them in the 19th century. Very few people know this, but there were hundreds of intentional communities in the 19th century. Some were religious, some were early socialists. There were all sorts of experiments in those days, and there still are now, and those are the same people. Most of the time it doesn't turn out really badly, thank God, but it can at times, and it's a risk. Life has risk on every hand, and sitting quietly really doesn't remove you from it very much, so better to live.
With regards to the Amish, it always interested me. How do you think they have managed to, I don't know, I'm not a great researcher here, so I don't know the intimate details of the history of the Amish, but how have they managed to keep themselves so separate? Is it almost like they're virtually like a religious designation almost? They get treated with sort of special kid gloves that way?
Yes, it is largely religious, at least in the things that are on the public record. The Amish have done well and have been left far more alone than most people, largely because they're good neighbors. They're very different. They're definably different. You see them and you know right away. But they're basically pretty much good people. I mean, they have a few bad guys like anybody does, but they tend to get rid of them. And they are good people, and their neighbors respect them. The people around them who know them and trade with them respect them. And the rulers of whatever level had to kind of treat them well because the people around them respected them, and you don't want to tick off everybody all at once. So the Amish have more or less survived, more or less intact because of their virtues.
Something of a side point, but I think it does have great relevance to our own predicament. Isn't it interesting how, for example, a community like the Amish or just small indigenous societies or just smaller groups of people deal with criminals? And by that I mean common criminals, but also, criminals who are trying to set themselves up in control of others. Yeah, and they generally deal with them very well. We're so used to this idea that law is this big centralized thing, and there has to be some guy who has, the biggest guy has to have the only sword and bring down justice upon everybody else. It's not really the best model for it. It's the model that all of us know, and we have been taught that it's the only model. But decentralized justice and ad hoc justice are actually in many ways better. People, come up with things, well, if you do that, something could go terribly wrong. Well, yeah, they could. But things go terribly wrong underneath the existing system every day in large numbers. But we've been conditioned to accept that. And we kind of ignore those horrible things that happen. And then when some new idea, like what you're talking about, how these small groups handle it, comes along and say, oh, no, something could go wrong. It's really just people have been conditioned to think of it in a certain way, and also that they don't really want to consider anything new because it requires too much work. Well, all that sort of bureaucracy and unnecessary regulation, that comes under the umbrella of health and safety here in the UK. I don't know if you have a similar branch of government over there, basically to try and all sorts of absurd things. I mean, this is the branch of government that has, may contain nuts on a bag of nuts and caution hot coffee on a cup of coffee.
Right. We have actually a few different people that do, different groups that do that here, but it's this very same effect, and it's just wild. I mean, you would think that nobody had any sense anymore and couldn't think for themselves that, hot coffee might be hot, and they have to warn everybody. It's just kind of, it's bureaucracy going to seed.
And of course, in terms of, as you say, trying to prevent things going wrong, I mean, probably the most glaring example, most expensive example is the so-called war on terror. I don't know at what point all the government and media found that they couldn't say the word terrorism anymore, but it's terror apparently now. I mean, the money that is spent in the name of quote-unquote keeping us safe, when in fact, statistically you're more likely to die choking on a peanut falling over in the bathtub, but they don't have a war on bathtubs or a war on peanuts.
Oh, I know. The whole thing is just, it's fear-mongering, and it is taking advantage of people's weakness, taking advantage of their fear, and keeping them whipped up. I mean, look, as horrible as the thing in Boston was a few weeks ago, it was only less than a handful of people died. Now, it really, really, really stinks, but to change an entire civilization because a small number of people die, well, a small number of people die in car wrecks before breakfast. People have been whipped up, and they spend huge portions of their lives just watching television and getting all this stuff downloaded into them. And, you watch, I don't know, I haven't been in the UK in a couple of years, so I don't know what your television is entirely like. But in the States and in Europe where I've lived, the shows are always, the great cops finding the bad guys and, bringing justice. People are so deep into this belief that, the state is the great protector and any sacrifice is acceptable, and give away your rights, it doesn't matter because there could maybe possibly be a nuke underneath, underneath Earl's Court that's going to blow up, and we have to, do everything possible to save lives. But it's really not based on reality. Terrorism's a horrible thing, blowing up buses or, what happened in New York 12, 13 years ago. Horrible stuff. But life is full of terrible stuff. This is a tough world. Has nobody read history? Does nobody realize what's going on before? This is the first time. And do we really think that giving up all of our rights is going to turn out better for us in the end? Well, why did we have them in the first place?
Oh, on UK TV, we have American TV, essentially. We have that alphabet soup of programs that are basically all about terrorism, CSI and ABC and XYZ and whatever they are. It's just loads of like square-jawed American heroes just leaping into cars and zooming around the place and torturing people.
Right. We call it cop worship TV.
Yeah, very good. It's exactly what it is. It's like glamorizing authority, basically.
Yeah. It's just out of proportion. And like you say, the amounts of money that are being spent on it, and what happens to the poor soldiers. I know lots of soldiers and have known a lot of military people. Some of these are, they're kids, really, and they see what happened on 9/11, and they're upset, and they want to bring justice. And I understand that. That's a good and healthy impulse. But they're sending these kids out into places, they're getting arms blown off and legs blown off, and watching their friends get blown up, or having to kill people. These things ruin human beings. And, they're coming back and they're dying, and they're killing themselves. There's a lot of suicides among returning soldiers. These guys are the real worst victims of the whole thing. And, and here in the States, they're not taking care of them very well. I know people in that world. And these people coming back are not getting proper treatment. And it's horrific what happens to them, and they're really the worst victims.
Now, overall, to zoom back out again and just look at civilization as a whole, what you're advocating really is voluntary societies. And some people may say, well, surely that's what we have. We vote for politicians, and in terms of voluntary, well, I go out, I go down the street, I go to the store, I go to the bar, I go to the cinema, and, mostly nobody's harassing me. It is voluntary. But as I mentioned earlier, there's an amazing number of things that where coercion and control will be brought to bear if you step ever so slightly out of line. And the way of living where you would say, look, I don't want to give anything to a state. I don't want anything from a state. Leave me alone. That's, for most people, seemingly impossible.
Oh, it's illegal. You're allowed to make your choices within certain limits. Let's take two polar opposite political stances. Let's take the person who opposes abortion, who thinks that it's a bad and ugly thing. Is it moral to take this man or woman's money by force and spend it on abortion? It's not. And on the other side of the coin, take the young man or woman or whomever who thinks that people should be allowed to smoke marijuana if they want to. It's their life and they're not hurting anybody, and they should be left alone. Is it right to take their money to hire policemen or agents to sneak up on people and threaten them with violence and beat the hell out of them and lock them in a cage? That's an immoral thing to do with their money. So whichever side of the political spectrum you're on, you're not allowed to choose. Your money is taken from you. You have no choice in the matter. Otherwise, you could end up in big, big trouble. And it's spent on things that you think are immoral. This is not a voluntary life. It's a big problem that's facing us.
Your newsletter basically offers many, many different types of ideas and information, some of which can lead people to perhaps seeing how they can make a different life for themselves, even within this system, because it doesn't have to be everything all at once. It can be areas of your life where you can begin to make changes, and also in terms of preparing for what's coming down the line. Sort of areas I'm thinking of would be how you organize your food supply, your shelter, where you get your energy from, your personal economics, how you earn money, what type of money you use, all sorts of issues like that, healthcare, education. It goes on and on. These are all areas that we can make different choices in.
Absolutely, and it's very, very important that we do. The mistake that a lot of good people make is that they say, yeah, things should be different. Yeah, we really should live differently. Yeah, okay, well, I'm going to study it for a year and then decide what to do. And then 1 year becomes 2, becomes 3, becomes 5. What's important is that people act, whatever it may be. Let's say you decide that government schooling is a bad idea. You researched the origins of it back in the 1800s. You research how it's designed and why, and you say, no, this isn't good. I don't want to do this. Well, then act. Then homeschool your children, or find a group of people that are schooling their children in a way that you think is better. But do something. Even if you act and you choose wrongly, you pick something that doesn't turn out quite so well, at least you're active, and you can always adapt, and you can always do something else. The great problem is sitting still and not doing anything. So in any of these areas, I am thrilled when people are active doing something rather than just sitting and complaining.
Now, I want to ask you briefly about monetary reform, because that's one of my main areas, is how our economic system works. Because it seems to be it's been a rolling crisis now since, 07, 08. Where do you see that going? Because I'm feeling that mathematically the system is bound to collapse, but then collapse in quotes, what does that look like? Is it actually going to be a wake up one morning and the ATMs don't work? Or, is reform going to be forced on the system because the way things are going? Or are the sort of powers that would be going to find just another way to keep this Ponzi scheme going?
You ask great questions and hard ones, too. You're right. The system as it is cannot continue forever. It's simply mathematics. The way money is created, our currency is created, is absolutely horrifying when you actually see what it is and how it actually works. It's too much to explain right now. But when the first time you actually get it and see where, in my case, dollars come from, you go, no, that can't be true. It couldn't be that way. That's not possible. They would never do that. But they do. So it's a fraudulent money monopoly from the beginning. And it's built on a model that has to eventually collapse. The two main ways of collapse that seem the most likely are inflation and deflation. Inflation, if they just keep printing money, eventually, the price of a hamburger, is 100 pounds, and then it's 500 pounds, and the value of money just goes to almost nothing. The other way it could go would be a deflationary collapse, where nobody's spending anymore and prices drop, and anybody who's got a loan is in deep trouble because you took out a 200,000 pound loan on your house while you were making 100,000 pounds a year, and now you're making 20,000 pounds a year. How are you going to pay off that loan? Those are the two primary methods that it collapses, and it's really hard to say at this point which one it will be. There's so many games being played behind the scenes. Right now, the Federal Reserve is printing $85 billion per month and injecting it into the markets, buying up people's mortgages, things like that, not to mention the U.S. government, $1.some trillion a year in deficit spending. So, it's a house of cards that can't stand forever. I only wish I knew precisely when and how it would fall.
In terms of just sticking with money, in terms of kind of trying to do something different, stepping out of the system, I had great hopes for Bitcoin, though I noticed that there was that artificial bubble was created there. I think I'll get your take on this, but I think to scare people away from it. And then, of course, there seem to be moves now to make some sort of Bitcoin foundation, which again would be centralized control, completely against the spirit of it. And if you were a conspiracy theorist, you might say, well, the Bitcoin Foundation is the system getting in to undermine this potentially independent thing.
Your analysis is very good. I am still very, very keen on Bitcoin. It's decentralized money, and it's working surprisingly well. Yeah, there was a bubble. There was a bubble at about $30 too. Nobody remembers that now. but it went up from, oh gosh, I don't recall, 50 cents to $30. And then it crashed back to $3 or something. And of course, then it began its upward cycle again. So, when you have real unregulated markets, that sort of thing happens, especially when it's a new thing, a new type of currency. Bitcoin has been attacked lately. The banking system, the banks and the governments, they're partners, really. That whole team has been going after them. They've been taking down the online exchanges because it's easy to do. It's a very interesting thing when you say, well, why are they attacking this stuff? It's a peaceful currency. It doesn't cost anybody anything. If you don't like it, you don't have to use it. Why must they attack this thing? What does it say about them and their currency that they have to violently attack this new tiny little currency compared to them? That's very tough. But Bitcoin, again, excites me because there are so many young people who are active in the Bitcoin community. These kids are writing new programs, modifying Bitcoin, making overlays for Bitcoin, exchanging Bitcoin. You can meet people at a local Starbucks or a local pub and buy and sell Bitcoins with them. It's done all the time, and there are all these people who are active doing it, and that to me is the real exciting part of the whole thing. Human beings actively seeking liberty and seeking to live in better ways. Boy, that's the cure for just about everything.
Now, one of the things that gets talked about sometimes in alternative circles is relocation. There are people who are advocating that particularly for people living in areas like North America and within the EU and what have you. And there's others who say, well, really, effectively today there is nowhere to run. I mean, countries, I've read articles recently on Costa Rica, on the Philippines, a lot on Chile, actually, is perhaps a good place for more freedom-minded people to go. I mean, I was in Iceland a couple of years ago, quite like the look of that. But what's your take? I mean, not necessarily what you've personally done, but just on the whole issue of relocation.
Well, it's an interesting subject, and there are points pro and con. You mentioned several of them. One thing is that it's good for people to get away and go live somewhere else for a while. It's just internally, it's good for us to get out of the expectations that form around us over years and years. It's good to pull yourselves out of it from time to time and go somewhere else. Another interesting thing about relocating is that you often, strange as it sounds, you are often treated better as a foreigner than you are as a local. You are left alone more. And the world is a very large place. And there's all sorts of things that are legal in one place that aren't in another. So let's say you are somebody who really likes smoking cannabis. Okay? You can move to Amsterdam. I guess Amsterdam's not quite as good as it used to be, but you can move to California, and you can smoke all the cannabis you want there. Maybe you prefer different sorts of monetary freedom that's more important for you. Well, you can pick places like, Hong Kong or Singapore, or places where there's far less regulation, or, all sorts of options, and some of them are very good for people. On the other hand, as you mentioned, there really isn't any place that's all that great anymore. In the 17th century, people could escape to North America, and a lot of people did. 1 million or more probably, Northern Europeans primarily, England and Holland and other places, Germany, came to North America precisely because they were running away from the governments that were oppressing them in Europe, in the old world. So there was a place to run away to in those days. America in the 1700s was a wilderness. King George was a long, long way away and had very little power, if any, in the frontier areas, and people could go and live as they wished. You can't do that anymore. Everywhere you go, there is this thick web of government that controls everything from, you're not allowed to drive a car unless you tell us, who you are, where you live, and sign this, such and such, and let us take your picture and fingerprint you, and you have to keep our rules and pay us so much every year, or you can't even have a car. It's not enough that you just buy it from somebody voluntarily. No, you have to jump through all of these hoops and pay us all these fees. That exists everywhere. So there's really, outside of places like the Antarctic, where they would probably come and drag you away anyway, there's nowhere really to go at the moment. One of these days, space will open up again, and people will run away again.
Well, just in closing, Paul, perhaps in regards to everything we've been talking about, you could give us your sentiments on what you're seeing from people you're in contact with, your readers, anybody you're communicating with, in terms of there does seem to be a gathering awakening to how things are, what's really going on, but there also seems to be a number of people who seem to be going ever more into a media-induced coma, seemingly as some sort of protective measure for themselves. So I just don't know what you see a decade from now.
Boy, that's a great question again. I see things both good and bad. The internet is a problem. It has been turned into a surveillance web, and it is being turned into a manipulation web. The internet was the greatest thing that, well, in my lifetime at least, that ever happened for human liberty. Oh my God, what a wonderful, wonderful thing. But it has been taken over. It is now fully a surveillance web, and it is turning into a manipulation web. So that's the negative side. It can still be used for a number of things, but don't ever think that there's any such thing as privacy on the internet, not unless you either work for it or pay for it. But the explosion that we had from the internet has just been stunning. Let's say 1990, I knew the Liberty people of 1990, and there weren't many of them. And who they were primarily overeducated guys, in New York or Los Angeles, maybe a couple in Chicago, a few in Minneapolis, but they were all these hyper-educated analytical types. Well, now there are people who understand liberty better than those guys did, who are living in Homer, Alaska, Tyler, Texas, Topeka, Kansas, little tiny towns that, unless you've lived in the area, you've never even heard of. And they're full of young people who get it. The Ron Paul candidacy this last time and the time before, there were thousands of young people following around this old doctor to hear him to lecture about the Federal Reserve. In 1990, that was unthinkable. That it happened. It happened slowly, so we didn't appreciate it, but it was miraculous. And that's just in the political arena. In a dozen other areas, people are starting to wake up. It's not enough yet for it to really be seen clearly and for it to see it everywhere, but it's going on every day. This didn't happen 20 years ago, and I think we're going to have more of it in 10 years. And if we do have more of it in 10 years and 20 years, then we might be okay in the end. I mean, if we can get through this next, whatever it is, this next period of time with government structures and violence just going crazy, if we get through that, we're golden. The future is magnificent. We just have to get rid of this self-denial of will and judgment. Once we get past that, we're great.
Excellent. Paul, well, just in closing, if perhaps you'd like to share with listeners your website, a bit of information about your newsletter, and you've also got cryptohippie.com, of course. Right.
Sure, thank you. The website for the newsletter is freemansperspective.com, just the way it sounds, freemansperspective.com. And we have all sorts of free articles, and then we have a monthly premium newsletter. What we really cover, we cover everything about life and liberty except for politics and daily economic problems. We're not giving you stock picks. We're not talking about the politician du jour. We're talking about history, philosophy, life, contentment, the things you mentioned earlier, how to arrange your life with food and currency to take back your control of your own life and to enjoy your own life. And my other business is called Crypto Hippie, cryptohippie.com, just kind of the way it sounds, CRYPTOHIPPIE. And what we do is we provide real privacy on the internet. We run a very special sort of computer network a lot of cryptography and things like that, and we protect your privacy on the internet. There are ways that it can be done for free, but it requires a lot of time and effort to do it right, and you have to do it right or not at all. In our system, you have to pay for it, but it does it for you without having a 15-minute setup, rather than having to pay attention to security all the time.
Well, Paul, thank you very much for joining us today on LegalizeFreedom.com.
Thank you.
Well, folks, that's it for another week. As ever, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please check out the website LegalizeFreedom.com. That's legalize-freedom.com. And there you'll find an archive of programs on many equally interesting and fascinating topics. Until next time, I'm Greg Moffat, and you've been listening to LegalizeFreedom.com.